moving on to our next panel, 49th Legislative District, Position 2. So, our PSA, just like TV. Have you moved? Have you changed your name? If so, you can make changes online at votewa.gov. You can also go to sos.wa.gov and download the voter's guide from the website, and it's searchable for all your local candidates.
I would love to tell you my story.
Thank you, Sharon. Hi. Good to see you. Yeah. I'll get out of your way.
We're good. Thank you.
Good to see you.
As mentioned, our next forum will feature candidates for the 49th Legislative District, Position 2. Joining us are Monica Giordano Stonier and Jeremy Baker. Welcome to you both. Once again, candidates, please watch the league timers in the front row and stay within the timelines for each question. As stated, you'll have 60 seconds to answer most questions, and I'll let you know the ones that have our 90-second answers. And a reminder, attacks of a personal nature are not allowed. We're here tonight to learn about your positions on the issues and your qualifications. So beginning with question number 1, and this is the order of which you appear on the ballot. Why do you want to be a legislator? What issues are most important to you? And what skills and ability would you bring to the position? Candidate Stonier.
Thank you, and thank you to the League for this evening. I'm always look forward to an opportunity to have a nonpartisan and public forum for candidates to share their thoughts on the issues. I'm hoping to return as the state representative in the 49th District to work on issues that brought me to the legislature in the first place. As a public school teacher, I was very frustrated that our state policies were getting in the way of our students' learning, and I think that had a negative impact on their ability to demonstrate that on something that I think is overemphasized, which is state tests, and limiting their ability to show that in other ways, which has been the body of the work that I'm doing. Also serving on the healthcare committee, it's important to me to continue to increase access to healthcare services for Southwest Washington in ways that may happen in other parts of the state, but not necessarily here. So I'm hoping to continue to work on those issues.
Thank you. Candidate Baker.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to express what we need to do as a state. So I got involved with running for this position because I, like most of you, looked around and go, what is going on? What is happening? Why are things the way they are? And I think everybody should ask themselves, in these last couple of years, is my life better? Are we going in the right direction? And quite frankly, it's time that we need new leadership. And when I got involved, I looked around and I didn't see any leadership, and so that's why I'm here. I am born and raised in Vancouver, in the Pacific Northwest. I went to Prairie High School. I am married to my high school sweetheart. I have 4 beautiful boys. I'm a Marine Corps veteran and a small businessman. I built a business with my father, and we sold that to the national competitor. So I understand what it takes to do hard things. And with that leadership ability, that's what we need in these coming years, and I appreciate your support.
Next question. What are your thoughts about replacing the state gas tax with a road usage tax where drivers would pay according to the number of miles they drive? Candidate Baker.
Well, thank you. Currently, our gas taxes are extremely high and are going to get much higher. In 2023, everyone here can expect to get 46 cents added to their gas tax, and that is going to keep rising and rising and rising until 2030. You can expect to pay $1.77 in total gas taxes. And so the idea that we need to change our gas tax structure is obviously that's the push, and that's the direction they want us to go, because they are literally taxing us out of our vehicles. In my opinion, we need to get back to basics. We need to reduce these costs to our energy structure, and we need to make it so we can build businesses and build families, because our poor and our minorities, they cannot withstand this increases, and we need common sense. And with me as your representative, you will get that. Common sense leadership is what we need.
Thank you. Candidate Stonier.
Thank you, Jane. I think if we are going to continue the trend of reducing our dependency on fossil fuels, then I think we're headed in the right direction in this state. We lead the country here on that very issue. And my concern with how we approach that ever-changing direction is that we need to do it in a way that is in consideration of the equity that we have to have as a lens in our way to approach that. So if we're going to move towards a user-based approach so that people who are using the roads are paying for those roads, then we need to do that in a way that takes into consideration those who have access to the ability to do that. I just have to recognize that the industry is responding to this direction that consumers want. Consumers want greener vehicles, greener ways to transport themselves and goods, and that's why the industry is responding with greener vehicles. And I think that's been a partnership both with a policy direction and consumers.
Next question. Voting laws are a topic of great interest across the country. Are there changes you would like to see in Washington? If so, what are they? If not, why not? Candidate Stonier.
Thank you. Our voting laws in the last several years, led by the majority, has expanded access to the voting process for many people. That means that people, when they are getting their driver's license, can check a box to ensure their ballot starts to come to them rather than having to do an additional step along the way. You can register to vote in person and get your ballot at the office with the same-day voter registration policy, and we have a very sound mail-in voting process that allows many people to access the voting process in a way that is amenable to those who are working, those who have a shift they can't get off, those who are lacking the ability to get out of their homes to do so. This is the policy that I think that we have led on, and continuing to increase that access is only going to increase participation by voters.
Candidate Baker.
Yes, our voting system needs to be secure, and it needs to be robust, and we need participation. And what that looks like differs between people's ideas. It is my opinion that we need to make sure that citizens get to vote and non-citizens do not get to vote. Ms. Stonier mentioned that the driver's license, you can just check a box and you can be registered to vote. But the problem in Washington State, you cannot discern if you're a citizen or a non-citizen. If someone comes and checks that box, they are now registered to vote, but they're not authorized to vote. And so that is a huge problem. And in addition to that, we need more public disclosure. So the voter cast vote records, that would be good transparency that we can bring into our system so everybody can be comfortable with how their vote is and how it was counted, because we need to make sure that only legitimate votes count.
Thank you. Next question. Tuition continues to rise at state colleges. Should Washington provide more financial support to colleges, or should schools be required to trim their costs? Or other suggestions? Please explain. Candidate Baker.
Yes, thank you so much. So, like I said, I have been in this community my entire life. I went to WSU in Pullman, and I got a degree in history and English, and it was my intention to be a school teacher. But then when I got out of school and I was married to my high school sweetheart, I realized, that school teacher position was not going to provide what I needed. And so I joined the laborers union. I joined the brick masons union. I worked in the trades, and I built a life for my family that was much better than what I could have done as my college education. And I think that needs to be addressed, is that why are we pushing every child into the university without an idea of how am I going to pay for the cost of this tuition? If we can go ahead and increase the trades and get access to those systems, then we can reduce the demand for our universities. And by reducing the demand, the universities are going to have to get competitive, and with that competition, we'll lower the prices, and then we won't burden our children and their next generations.
Thank you. Candidate Stonier.
Thank you. I appreciate the direction here in that we need to make sure that students have options of their career choice and their college choice in the future. My crowning accomplishment that I'm incredibly proud of in the legislature is creating graduation requirements that allow for a CTE pathway so that can happen. And I think if a student chooses to go to a college, university, or any post-secondary education, they should be able to afford so. The state has made an incredible reduction in the state contribution to higher education, and I think we need to get back on track in that way, but I think we do need to keep those options open. In my first session as a legislator, I introduced a low interest revolving account as a policy for folks that can apply and get a low interest loan and then pay it back because they were likely to go into a workforce that was high demand in this state. So we knew they were going to work, we knew they were going to pay it back, it was going to be low interest and go into the revolving account for the next generation. Those types of ideas are worth considering again.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you. Next question. Voting districts lines across the state were recently redrawn, and the process was controversial. Legislators write the rules for redistricting. Are there changes you would support in the Washington state redistricting process? If so, what would those be? Candidate Stonier.
Thank you. Having looked at redistricting policies in other states across the country, oftentimes the party in control gets to control that process. In Washington, we benefit from a bipartisan and a multifaceted approach to ensure that there is not the level of gerrymandering that happens in other states in Washington. I'm proud of that. I think we should continue. Unfortunately, this was the first year in history, this first process in decade in history where our lines at the legislative level went to the court, and that's unfortunate. But I do think that the process by which we follow and the expected transparency is still sound. I think that there's less ability for folks at the county level to ensure that that process is also constitutional, because that would require folks closer to our local community to invest in the process of challenging that in the court. At the state level, it's easier to do. I'm happy with our state policy, but I'm concerned about whether or not the locals can do the same.
Time. Thank you. Candidate Baker.
Yes, thank you. So voting redistricting is obviously something that's on top of mind because we just did it. But we are not going to be doing it in the next 10 years. And so to be quite frank, I don't think it's very relevant for this next term. We can always do better, and that would be my goal, to make sure we look into how we do it in the future. But like Ms. Stonier says, that it is a bipartisan thing. But what I think this audience would really like to understand is, what are we going to do about crime? What are we going to do about the high cost of living? What are we going to do that can position our children for their next generations, and how can we better our community? That's really what the question should be, not should we redistrict in 10 years from now.
Thank you. Next question. What do you like, or what would you change about the modified locally preferred alternative to replace the Interstate 5 bridge? This is a 90-second question. Candidate Baker.
Yes, this is a great question because we have been dealing with this issue for quite some time. Everybody understands that the last iteration failed miserably, and now we seem to be going down the same path. The Clark County residents is looking for leadership on this issue. The current body has led us down the same path again that we resoundingly rejected. We do not want light rail. We do not want tolls. And so I don't understand why our leadership is continuing to go down this path. To be quite frank, we need a third bridge. We need ring routes. We need alternatives to get these trucks around Portland. They do not want to go through downtown Portland. They want to go through and get to their next job. They want to deliver their goods. And so if we can go ahead and build another bridge, build a ring road, we can reduce congestion, because the current iteration of our plan to build a I-5 bridge does nothing to reduce congestion. And that really hurts every family, because with that congestion, we have time away from our families. We have wasted fuel, wasted costs, and like Ms. Wiley mentioned, we have more pollution. So if we can get more roads and get the traffic around the Portland area, then we can actually get that congestion addressed. And then we can address the I-5 bridge. Let's fix the congestion first, not just put a boondoggle bridge over I-5 because we want light rail. Thank you so much.
Candidate Stonier?
Thank you. I want to make 2 points very clearly. First, we cannot legislate across the river. We're not elected in that state. So that requires partnership and communication in order to make sure that whatever project comes to bear is one that meets the needs of the community. The community has decided in a bipartisan fashion. Southwest Washington legislators over the last several years have come together to identify the I-5 crossing as a priority. It's not just the case for this region, it's the case for the state. That bridge is a priority for a reason. And it has been decided so. The changes that I would make is, as my seatmate who serves on the Transportation Committee has said, is expanding the number of lanes would increase the mobility, which is the ultimate goal. That, in addition to a safe bridge that wouldn't collapse. So I would love to see a multimodal option, and I think all of those options are going to come to bear and be open for discussion. But ultimately, it will be a compromise between the two states about what the states can afford. Now, we live here in the 49th District in Southwest Washington. We know that our folks cross that river to live or to work all the time. And the cost to folks that will have to pay tolls, should that be the option that Oregon chooses, will have to be mitigated and supported in some way by people who represent them in this community. And if that should happen, I stand by ready to help with that cost to our working families across the river.
Thank you. Next question. A national panel of medical experts last month recommended all adults be screened for anxiety. What do you see as the legislature's role in dealing with the state's mental health needs? Candidate Stonier.
Thank you. It is no surprise or secret that mental health services are in high demand across the country and globally as a result of the pandemic, but frankly, it was a crisis before the pandemic hit. Our young people in particular, our LGBTQ community in particular, has suffered generational trauma as a result of challenges that they face in our communities. But we can work on that in other ways. But the number one focus around making sure that people have access to mental health services is not only one that we should focus on at all levels of government and as community members, but we need to be thinking about this in the workforce realm as well. That's why I'm working with our local folks to make sure that our young people can find entry points into healthcare services, particularly mental health services, elder care services, and other areas where our community has a huge workforce need and nobody going into it. That's the crisis we're facing right now. We need providers, and I'm happy to help with that in future legislation.
Candidate Baker.
Yes, thank you so much. First and foremost, I want to go back to Ms. Stonier's comment that we need to negotiate with the other party. What the 49th people want, they want leadership. They want people that can stand up and do what's right for our district. And that's what you will get. That's not what you have, that's what you will get when you elect me in the 49th. As for mental health, we have to understand that the government is causing a lot of these issues with the tactics and procedures that they are putting in place. My child had a ginormous struggle. He struggled so mightily because they shut the schools down. And it really frustrated him, and it's really why I'm here today, is because of what happened to my child, because the government decided that they would take everything away from him. We can never let that happen again. We need leadership. We need people to take a stand for our children and the next generation, and with me, you'll get that.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support our current state abortion laws? If so, why? And if not, what would you change? Candidate Baker.
Yes, thank you. So first and foremost, I am pro-life, but I'm also pro-mother. I think it's very important to recognize that the mother is involved, and so is that new baby that is there. And so what we really need to understand that is this pro-choice idea is that we have made abortion the only choice. And I think that is a disservice to this new baby that we need to take into account. Now, 65% of the people in this nation do not want abortion on demand all the way to the 9th month. But my opponent is of the position we do not need to limit abortions at all. And I see that as a huge problem. We need to make sure that at some point we are taking care of that baby and giving them the time, the justice that they need, the ability to have that life. Pro-life does not mean anti-choice. We can have abortion, we can have adoption, we can have help for the mother, and we can provide other alternatives.
Thank you. Commissioner Stonier, candidate.
Thank you. I stand by the laws in the state, and I will seek to strengthen them if that's necessary. Let's be clear, banning abortions does not end them. It just means that people who can access them will. And those who cannot, particularly childbearing people of color, will continue to suffer the generational poverty and trauma that they have in the past and before Roe v. Wade. That is a fact. I will continue to protect the options for access to life-saving health care for all childbearing people in this state. Late-term abortions, as mentioned by my opponent, are less than 2% unless the mother is in life-threatening crisis. So that fear tactic is one that starts conversations, yes, but is not reflective of what really happens in a healthcare setting. I will do everything I can to protect every person's ability to make those healthcare decisions with the support of their medical professionals.
Thank you. Next question. Do you believe any changes are needed in the Growth Management Act? And if so, what would you support? Candidate Stonier.
Thank you. So the GMA provides us a planning mechanism so that we can carefully plan for the growth in our communities. We can take into consideration access to water, land, resources. We can think about the schools that would need to be built and the housing that would need to be built. All of that is incredibly important. There's a reason why we have a citizen legislature, so that we can go back and continue to revisit this policy and respond in ways that make sense for our communities. There's been a lot of tinkering around in the GMA in several policy committees, in local government, in the Environment Committee, because this touches a number of different aspects of our policy making at the state level. So fortunately, we can continue to elect people from our communities to advise the regional interests in that planning mechanism so it can continue to work statewide.
Thank you. And Candidate Baker.
Yeah, so the GMA has really stifled development in our state, and it has really added to the cost and the affordability that our families are struggling with. The houses have gone up from 93,000 when the GMA was passed in 1990. The median house was $93,000. Today it is $560,000. That's a 500% increase. Our wages have only gone up 50%. So there's a disconnect here. And why is that? It's because the government has got in the way of development and added the extra costs. Mr. LaFay had mentioned that they add over $100,000 for each new home. They also add time, and it takes up to 2 to 6 years to get a subdivision developed. But what it's doing is not necessarily protecting farmland. It's not necessarily making sure that we build in the right spots. There's farms that are being rezoned to be houses in Philida, where perfectly good pieces of land next to I-5 are not being developed because it's agriculture. We can do better.
And now our final question. It's your turn to close. You may want to elaborate on an answer you already gave or talk about something we didn't cover to sum up your candidacy, beginning with you, Candidate Baker.
Yes, I really would like to go back to the point that Ms. Stonier made about abortion is really important for generational poverty. And that is a disgusting comment, because what she is saying is that because they're poor, we need to abort those babies, and they don't deserve a right to live. What those people in generational poverty need, they need safe streets. They need safe communities. And that is something we have not talked about. The state legislature has provided a community that is a condition in our state that is beyond compare. We have more crime and more problems than we've ever had before. We are allowing criminals to go free. On Friday, Ms. Stonier, because of one of your bills that you've passed, Roy Russell is going to be set out. He's going to get a chance to be free. He killed a 14-year-old girl in 2005 and got placed on a life sentence. I'm going to go down there, because the real leaders do. They go and talk to these people. Will you go down there and apologize for what you've done?
That's time. Candidate Stonier.
Thank you. I've really appreciated this forum because there's adherence to the policy that we sign at the door when we walk in, and I hope to see that continue in the future. I'm proud of my reputation as a collaborator in this community. I work well with Republicans across the aisle. I have a reputation for seeking to find common ground when there isn't and acknowledging common ground when there is. I also have a reputation for standing in my own space when I stand for issues I believe in, be that equity, access, be that abortion care access, be that dismantling institutional racism that puts in place the challenges we face as a community. I continue to work to put Southwest Washington on the map in this state because we are often left out. And I find a lot of bipartisan support in that, and I'm proud of that collaboration. I'm proud to deliver for this community. In each of my previous sessions, I'm asking for another one so I can continue to do that. The next challenges we face that I'm hoping to deliver on are issues like childcare and housing, and I'm asking for your support so I can return to work on those issues.
Thank you. And thanks to our candidates for this panel, the 49th Legislative District, Position 2.